Can you hear me?
Yep, I heard whoever that was.
Yes, that's better. I'll just rename myself.
Ah,
Hello, everyone.
hello. Folks are just joining. I'm going to give it a minute or so here. Well, it is 3 past, so I am going to get started. Welcome, everybody. I think from the attendance, it looks like Stephen is the only person who attended yesterday, maybe? Although actually, Stephen, so I know I heard your voice, but you aren't listed in the Google Doc. And I was only on the phone. I wasn't actually in the Zoom properly.
Yeah, so I was there yesterday. Kendrick was there as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, I see Kenny's name on the list there too.
Hello, everyone. So where is the link of the docs?
Oh, just a second, and I'll paste it into the Zoom meeting. Also, if you go to the main page for the release, there's a link there at the top of the page. And so I just pasted also a short link to the release info for 112. And then at the top of that page is a set of links. So it's got the short link to that, which has the calendar. It's got the meeting minutes link. The meeting minutes link also has the Zoom URL in it. So that's sort of a easy jumping off point for all the links there. If you always remember that one, the SIG releases 1.12. So I want to do sort of a recap of some things that happened in the meeting yesterday. Then we had talked about doing a run through of test grid. So that was done yesterday. And unfortunately, I was in the car driving. So I was unable to see the actual demo. So I will try to run through a demo today, unless we get Mohammed joining a bit here later also still. We'll see if he wants to repeat what he did yesterday. So today is the feature freeze. And it's interesting to see. This is always kind of a first milestone date. We find out how well we've interacted with the SIG leads and gotten their responses on things. And this is sort of a soft deadline in the sense that this isn't a code completion date, right? It's just, hey, write down what you're intending to aim to have done in the future for this release. So that exercise, we start to find out who is paying attention and listening to our nagging and who isn't, maybe, and who puts things off until the last minute and who doesn't. So we've gotten a whole bunch of new features defined coming in just over the last 3 or 4 days. So that's good. We're finding out more things that SIGs are interested in, but then again, sort of last minute, that may be slightly worrying. It means we have a little extra work to do to read through and understand what's going on and get a sense of what's going to be happening over the coming weeks. The other big thing today is that we will be attempting to make an alpha release. So the alpha release happens from master branch. It's not from a 1.12 specific branch yet. That won't happen until beta. So really today, this is just about exercising the mechanics of cutting a release. And it's going to be interesting to see because we have some new mechanics there, both in terms of the people and the code automation and mechanism for making a release. So the question that we have always at one of these release sort of milestones, and alpha is really the easiest, I would say, but should we make the release? And for alpha, my inclination here is to say yes without looking at anything, because it's an alpha. And we know we have this new code to exercise to try to cut the release. So the bigger thing for us here is to understand, can we make a release successfully, or in my opinion at the moment. Now, of course, it is important to take a look at test grid and make sure that we don't have things in a horrible, horrible state. And having looked over the last couple days, things are in an okay state. In the meeting yesterday, Mohammed characterized things as sort of in a yellow state, not red, not green. And I'd agreed with that. So that there's two areas of testing we look at mostly, the release blocking and the upgrade tests. And the upgrade tests have some issues. So at the end of the meeting, we'll do a little walkthrough of test grid, and I'll show you how I look at that to see what's going on. So Mohammed has opened a set of issues, and if you look at the minutes from yesterday, he's got a spreadsheet there where he's tracking them, and there's also a link to what's called the triage dashboard. So you can see what's going on in terms of assessing what the test failures are and reaching out and getting status from folks. On the bugs update, Gwen wasn't able to make yesterday's meeting, but she dropped some information into the notes from yesterday. It looks like we do actually have a couple of bugs, but for the most part, they're the failing tests. So things are pretty quiet. And this mirrors the 1.11 release. And for me, this was kind of worrying in the 1.11 release. And I'll try to explain why. We used to require that a pull request had an issue opened. And it makes sense from a developer perspective that this feels sort of like overhead, like, hey, somebody's mentioned a bug, I understand what's going on, I just want to fix it. And you just want to make the pull release and get the code in and kind of be done and move on with things. But from a release team perspective, we want to understand what the bug is and have a little more visibility into cause and effect. Does the pull request really feel like it fixed the bug? Does it imply risk in other areas, things like that? Because we're looking at a little bit bigger picture. So a simple pull request that just says something really minimal in a few words about fixing a bug in a particular area, maybe something with storage or volumes, and maybe the person who reported the issue notices the PR and says, yeah, it works for me now. But we don't see a whole lot of detail in that. So I get that there aren't as many issues now, but that kind of raises my concern level and makes me want to be watching a little more closely to understand the state of bugs. So right now we're in a phase where there's active development happening and we might have some destabilization. The tests start failing a little more and we have to circle back through the test path through CI signal to get things corrected. But we have a looser feedback loop, I feel like, just because we don't see the details of the issue. So We'll see how that goes over the coming weeks. It ended up being okay in 1.11, and I guess that was largely due to the work that the CI signal folks did just to really push on having a clean test signal always. So we can hope that that's the case again, but we'll need to watch out for it this cycle. Features is really where the main interest is this week. And since we do have Stephen on the phone, do you want to talk a little bit about what we've seen come in the last couple of days?
Yeah, sure, Tim. So it's kind of an exciting process because we're everything's happening a lot faster than it used to. Based on the nagging that we've done over the past few days, we've seen the features from the initial email that I sent out jump from 27 up to 54 features, which is kind of a lot higher than I've seen in the last few release cycles. What we'll see over the next, I want to say, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a little more, is maybe 30 to 40% of those features get cut. So stay tuned for that. And then even closer to the end of the cycle, we'll see those features. People didn't have time or things were deferred or missed. You'll see even maybe 15-20% more of those features drop out. So I expect to probably be looking at like 27 features or something like that for the actual cycle. So yeah, now I've sent out pings this morning. One to the KDev group, as well as release leads, the release team, and SIG leads. I've also kind of run through all of the issues that had no milestones, or issues that were marked as 112 milestone, but were not officially marked as tracked yes, which essentially means I haven't vetted it and said, okay, this does look good for the release, or you've provided the appropriate information. So yeah, we're end of day Pacific time. I'm gonna try to sweep again and see where we're at. People have been fairly responsive. The stuff that has been not so responsive, those are features that have been classically non-responsive. So I'm I'm not sure what to expect there. But we'll check it out. One interesting addition that I've done, and I need to clean it up a little bit, is I basically piggybacked off of the secping script that Jesse wrote to create all of the security contacts across all of the repos. I did something similar for the features repo, which essentially you can pop in a few labels and labels to exclude as well, and then it will go through and basically annoy people on the issues with those parameters. So I want to clean that up a little bit. I'll post that in the chat as well if you guys want to take a look. Cool.
I have a question on the spreadsheet. The stage status and stage columns, maybe it's just because it's first thing in the morning. When I see graduating and stable, does it mean graduating to stable? I think it must, just because of the plain English on that one.
Yes. So the idea is that, if something comes in as net new, we're kind of expecting it to be an alpha state. Mm-hmm. Sometimes things come in as net new beta. But yeah, the whole reason for adding that stage status is so that people understand that it's moving into the next phase, versus just whatever it was before.
That makes sense. I hadn't considered the net new beta potential.
So one additional things that I wanted to point out, we have SIG PM hopefully today, as well as the SIG release meetings, again, hopefully today, where we have a few agenda items around the features enhancement proposals. So this is basically helping to redefine what an enhancement looks like following the KEP process. So that's a proposal that Jace has been working on. I can, now that it's up on the agenda, I can actually say that I've been working on a proposal as well around features triage via automation. So the idea behind this would be to add a set of labels so that we can start to get some signal into what features look like across the features and KK boards. So essentially having a feature that is feature / at risk, or a feature / removed from milestone, or feature / needs triage, something like that, right? So having an additional set of labels around that, and maybe even building some bots to help move issues through those different label statuses, very similar to what the milestone bot looks like right now. I am moving around, but I will post links for that script, to the proposals that I'm talking about, as well as the SIG release and PM meeting notes, so you guys can take a look.
Okay, and it looks like the SIG PM meeting is in about 5 hours time.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I need to spend quite a bit of time today reading through the newly added features to get a sense of them. On the
I have one question.
Mhm.
So with static error requires a new feature, and I just created do it. Did you accept new features for 1.12?
So at this point in the release cycle, if the feature is submitted and not vetted by the end of the day, it will require an exception. If it's something that we've discussed, and I know it's like, some of the details are a little fuzzy, and Tim has ultimate veto power here, or decision-making power here. But essentially at this point, if features are not submitted by the end of today, they need to also include an exception request. So if you check out KDev, it has links to the exception request as well.
Okay, I have created the features PR here, the feature issue here. But the design proposal is not ready yet. I mean, still require Derek to finish then.
So I would say now that you've submitted it, it's fine. Just a cursory glance looks good. I would say try to get a proposal soon. It's more about having the tracking feature in there than having the proposal immediately. You'll notice that a lot of the features on the features tracking spreadsheet do not have proposals, which is bad. But it's kind of the state of the game right now. So
yeah, thanks.
And KEPs are still in, I don't know if we're calling them alpha or beta, I guess probably sort of beta, but KEPs are desirable but not required. And the line, I mean, I'm curious to see the SIG PM meeting today, the line between KEP versus feature, like what rises to the level of needing which one. It'll be good to have some additional clarity on that.
So yeah, so to give you a kind of general, the general intention is that the KEP is supposed to be the source of truth. The feature issue is tracking. It should be tracking a KEP, right? And the feature issue should kind of be, the KEP is the explanation of what's happening. The feature issue is the tracking umbrella for what's happening across all repos, right? So all of the information should be fed back into that feature issue, hopefully. The problem around the KEP process right now is that, one, like you said, it's alpha beta-ish, and two, the adoption criteria for KEPs is not defined per se, right? So when Jace's proposal comes out, or it's out when I actually link it so that you can see it, there are some definitions of criteria for actually pulling KEPs in, and what SIGs should be working on to make their KEPs accepted and properly tracked. So.
Okay, thank you. And it's good to see the improvements. I really like how much improvement on documentation's happening, whether the stuff around features in SIGPM or just the release team documentation improvements over the last weeks. This stuff feels like it's really good from a software engineering process perspective, that we're moving past some kind of early semi ad hoc days, writing down a whole lot more, formalizing and exercising based on the documented process. So this is really good improvement. Glancing through,
just an additional call out to documentation. I totally agree. I'm pretty excited about it. One thing that I would say for new contributors, new release team members, new-ish contributors, if you see something that you don't understand or you think the process is is not quite what it should be, call it out, feel free to contribute, and have someone review it. Like, because so much of the improvement that Tim's been talking about over the last few weeks or month or so has been people saying, I don't understand this. Let me see if I can write a document to better understand this. And then, we go through the review process and you get it merged in. So please, please, please feel free to contribute.
I can't echo that enough. That is one of the best things you can do as a shadow on the release team or a newcomer to any community, really. You have less built-in biases and assumptions and intuition for how to do things, and you're much more likely to follow the document to a T and stumble because somebody else read it differently based on their knowledge. And by not having that knowledge yet, you notice errors and you can then correct them in the documentation, and that's a huge improvement for the people who follow you. So looking, I don't see Mohammed having joined us today, so I've already linked, or no, I didn't link. Well, I'll add to the meeting minutes his link to CI Signal, but I think what I want to do is just go ahead and do a walkthrough of TestGrid and kind of show how I go about looking at things. And I'm actually excited to go look at the video from yesterday to see what Mohammed showed, because I expect to learn something from it. This is one of those tools where it's confusing, and even more than the tool itself, the tool is sort of a framework that enables a workflow. So every individual who approaches TestGrid is liable to navigate through it slightly differently. And then if we had two people looking at TestGrid who have different backgrounds and knowledge, they're going to key into different things, because this is partly about bug triage in a way. You're looking at something that failed and wanting to get at what's wrong. Now, the most simplistic thing is to say, well, okay, this particular test failed and we have SIG such and such owns that test. Let's go remind them to take a look at the test failure and resolve it. But a better bug report might have a little bit more triaging and assessing there. So I'm going to share my screen. Or share a window. Are you all seeing a browser window? I see nausea. Okay, so the URL that I remember is testgrid.k8s.io, and that is actually a redirect. But once you get there, you get this page, and each of these is a tile sort of that you can mouse over, and the blue ones have a list of things under them. One thing to note, when the window changes sizes, these move around. So you may have to do a little bit of hunting. So I'm initially interested in SIG release. That's the one where we get our sort of dashboards, but it moves around. So your very first thing, you start out hunting a little bit in this. And then there's a set of different things here. We've got tests that run on different targets. We don't have a 112 yet because we haven't created the 112 branch, but there's prior ones as well, because the community provides support for older releases. And there was a proposal yesterday that we should be removing the release 1.8 ones. And we actually don't have, this goes back to the documentation discussion, we don't have a formalized process of who or when or why we remove the old ones. Kind of informally, the community says it supports 3 prior releases. Well, now that we're on 112, 1.8 should be falling off the tail end of that. But do we do that the day 111 finishes, or 2 weeks or 4 weeks in? And historically, it's varied quite a bit. So I think Aaron Krickenberger maybe has a PR, or else it's on the agenda for the SIG release meeting later today to discuss what we want to do. But probably something like kind of 4 weeks in, part of the release team process will be, and I'm guessing probably the test infra people will drop those older tests. So lacking a 112 specific test at this point, and later in the cycle I would look at those. If there was a 112 set, I would open those, but primarily right now I'm looking at the master ones. So master blocking, I'm going to open in a new tab, and master upgrade, I'm going to open in a new tab. So either of these, master blocking or master upgrade, once you click into those, you get a whole bunch more detail. So there's a header area here that lists some sort of buckets, I guess, of area. And these are the same things that were the tiles on the first page. So master blocking and kubectl skew, master upgrade, 111, 10.9, 8. Those are all the same things that were in the drop down here. So once you get into the details, you can still do that top level navigation if you want to. So that's sort of this top. Oh, and can you all see my mouse as I wiggle it? Okay. So this top little bit of a heading area is that top level navigation. So down below that, since I'm in release master blocking, I've got a set of information about release master blocking tests. There's a summary, and you can scroll through and you get a bunch of information. I'll get a little more detail later. But then individual test buckets here, if they're having issues, instead of just being a blue link, they're red to catch your eye a little bit. So build, integration, Bazel build, those are the same that you have here in a little more detail. Build, integration, Bazel build. Now the first thing you'll probably see here, so build passing, all passing this week. Integration, it wasn't highlighted as red in the top, but it looks slightly different here. It's not a green check mark. It says integration flaky. So 36 of 55,000 tests, or 0.1%, 18 of 165 runs, or 11% nearly, have failed in the past week. So we have this configurable threshold. Things that are all passing, that's obviously easy, but what constitutes failure? And you don't necessarily know when you have flaky test cases or flaky infrastructure what is a failure until you've seen a number of them go by. So there's some thresholds that allow us to say, well, we've started having some failures, and those start getting reported as flaky tests, and at some point it crosses whatever the configurable failure is, and we go ahead and declare that the thing is a failure. And these actually look relatively good, these first ones here, so that the percentages are fairly low, but we come down here to, oops, I clicked. We come down here to GCI, GKE, it says flaky. 53% of the runs have failed in the past week. If you're flipping a coin and you're coming and you're hoping for heads and you come up heads 53% of the time, you're doing better than expected if it's a fair coin. But we're actually failing 53% of the time. So we're doing slightly worse than if this test was just flipping a coin. To me, that sounds like a problematic test or a failure, but this is a good one then to tunnel into. So I go ahead and click on that, and this is what the actual detailed results are. So here you still have the same headers for navigation, but you're getting detailed information on what's going on in the GCI, GKE bucket. So left column is a whole bunch of individual tests. On the very left of that, you have a SIG that's associated with the test. So as you're doing triage, trying to understand who to talk to, that is a useful way to understand who to first reach out. And then you've got something for hopefully a descriptive name of what the test is. But if you look here, actually, most of what's here looks green. And to me then, so having first said, well, like 53%, that's like worse than tossing a coin, but this actually looks mostly green. So at the very bottom, you have a horizontal scroll, and here you start to get a sense, okay, these tests were pretty consistently failing. So we may be biasing away from old through flaky towards good, especially on these two that are highlighted from SIG instrumentation. They were clearly consistently failing earlier in the week and appear to have cleaned up. Now, some of these towards the top, those are kind of what the flaky classically looks like. Green, red, green, green, red, green, green, red. That's the kind of flapping that we typically think of from the flaky term. And looking at those, they're flaking a relatively low, maybe 1 or 2 in 10, a lower percentage. So now I may be feeling a little sense of relief, like, okay, this test isn't horrible. Now the GCI, GKE bucket, we have people, those are Google specific, we have people who are focused on making sure that those go well, maybe more than some of the other corners of all of the broader tests. But often when something is failing, because there's so much here, and we're not the subject matter experts in everything, your first question is like, is this test good? What is this test? So you're doing some really high level kind of triage, trying to understand, like, and sometimes you'll find something that's just been read for a very long time. Like some of these have been failing for quite a while. Yeah, they started at the top here. You get some timestamps that give you days, and then there's also some commits there. So those have been failing, I think, since the 27th. Oh, and that actually, if I come back here, if I scroll down on this first navigator page, you do get a little more information. So GCI GKE serial has been failing, and it last passed yesterday. It first failed yesterday, but GCE scale last passed on July 27th. Well, that's interesting. Oh, these are longer running tests. Last pass 4 days ago, first failed 3. There's a gap there, but it's because these are longer running tests. So here you can get some sense of what you might be going to see in the details. Another nifty thing that I like to do as I'm triaging, so having tunneled back into the details. So looking at this first one here, SIG storage, persistent volumes local. 2 pods mounting a local volume. It failed briefly this morning. If you hover over a green cell that's just in the time series before the failure and drag your mouse over to the red, up pops a little thing that says search for changes. And when you click that, you come up with a new page, and it actually shows you what changed in the Kubernetes repo across that. And here it's telling us nothing changed. And we can actually see that, I think, at the top of the detail grid, you have some things that are commit numbers. And the top line, and you can mouse hover over it, it's part of the SHA from KK. The lower line are test infrastructure commits. So since looking at the difference here showed that there is nothing that changed, these are both on the same commit in KK 106.88.257E. This is maybe a change in test infrastructure, but looking at the columns there, you can see that test infrastructure was also at the same commit, but it changed just after. So this may be a case where test infra noticed something was flaky and they fixed it just after and the problem went away, or it could just be a straight up flake. So to get at that next level, if you click on just the red cell for the test, you tunnel into the detail results for that actual test failure. And you have a specific job number that was the run, but you also do get a little bit of aggregated info. So 2 tests fail out of 498 in this bucket. And I think, I'm trying to remember, this may be because it had gone from green to red. I think when you have multiple failures, there's another section here that shows a little more history. Oh yeah, well, you could do it here. View test history on test grid. You can get at just that particular test. And there actually you do, as you just rapidly scroll through time, you can see that maybe this one is just kind of flaky. And in the view settings, you can go into a super compact view and see that in a little more detail, the history, without quite so much scroll. So this test just looks like it's probably historically flaky. And looking at it now, actually, I'm on a slightly wider view. So this particular one that I'm looking at is something related to NFS. Maybe there's just some network flakiness or some slowness or something timing out. But we do want to get to a place, and Aaron was really stressing this yesterday. At this point in the assessment, you could say, well, okay, this is a flaky test. maybe I'll check in tomorrow and see, like, has it continued to be red? But looking through the history, you can just on this one kind of tell it's a flaky test. We should have an issue open for this to understand better what's going on. And we want to get to where we don't have any of these. And this is actually something really positive, I think, that happened in 1.11. In 1.11, we had, up until 1.11, we had typically a lot of destabilization that happened on feature implementation or during feature implementation. So these flakes were like a second order problem. We really had to focus on just fixing the things when they broke, catching them relatively quickly, getting people focused on breakage, fixing breakage. But now that we mostly are keeping a clean CI signal, we're getting quick turnaround when breakage happens. We need to clean up this remaining fuzz on the edge of the testing and work to make these tests more reliable, more stable. So opening issues is a first part of that, and then working to build this culture of actually fixing them. So Aaron's on the steering, and he's also now at Google. So I think we have people in the right places to continue the nudging on that culturally, but I think also from the release team perspective, that's something that we can really help to bolster. From a developer perspective, if you've gotten into the details of this test, hopefully something here tells you something. And I guess for me, I see a loopback setup has failed. So we're trying to mount something and a loopback device is saying it's busy. That's actually interesting. I have an idea of what might be going on here, and that makes me want to go look at the test. So you get some references in here to what the test name is and what the test code is. So right here up at the top, we have what this is. And I'm actually going to go look at that later today to see how they are managing their loopback devices. The LO setup command I think of as a Linux command that's deprecated. That there's a better one out there, because when you use LO setup, it's very common that you run into device or resource busy conflicts. So I'm curious if there's a way to move this to use a different tool that is more reliable. Otherwise, when you're using LO setup, you usually need to wrap it in a overly complex loop that figures and logic that figures out how to find a non-busy resource. But if you do that, your test becomes more reliable. This looks like a classic flaky test that could be made better. So briefly, I'm going to bounce over to the release master upgrade dashboard. This one, so this again, to kind of go from the top, I've on test grid, SIG release tile, and release master upgrade. Compared to the other one that we started on where it was mostly green, right here, we mostly have fails and flaky. So upgrades are the domain typically of SIG cluster lifecycle, and depending on the type of test, we have tests that are handled through kubeadm and not through kubeadm. So the first pass triage here usually is figuring out, do we reach out to kubeadm or who else in SIG cluster lifecycle? But as I'd shown in the other one, as I tunnel in here, one of the first things in the individual test case reference is the name. So here we have SIG API machinery being highlighted. So that's probably who needs some talking to there to see what's up. There's some older failures in SIG storage here. Yeah, those look like they resolved a couple of weeks ago. So probably the current issue, and having started a number of days ago and been consistently read, we have a problem with this admission webhook test. So I'm pretty sure on each of these already, yeah, these are ones that Mohammed has opened issues on and is reaching out to the SIGs. But I want to just kind of walk through that from a workflow perspective, show some of the little mouse hovers and things like making the size compact so you can get a sense of frequently failing versus flaky. See the SIG label here, and then the trick of saying, well, okay, what changed in between these two cells? Search for those changes, and nothing changed on that one, which you could already see. Where's one where something changed? actually show an example of that. Now, here we go. So between these two commits, something did actually change. So you get a GitHub query that's searching between two commit IDs, and we have a couple of things here. A timeout for slow math on ARM, and that is it. This particular test failure that I was looking at there, this one, I'm gonna guess that has nothing to do with ARM. And the other thing here that I see on this one says serial. Serial tests run in order, and that means they often run slowly, which means if there's something flaky, statistically, it's more likely to crop up. Yes, so clicking on the detail, you can see this particular test, it has an elapsed time of almost 14 hours. So across 14 hours, if something went wrong somewhere in the infrastructure, something was excessively slow, or we had something that didn't handle a timeout well, and yeah, here, waiting for terminating namespaces to be deleted, timed out. So something was slow. And our timeout was short enough that we bumped into it maybe. If this had run slightly longer, it would have succeeded. This is also a common pattern, unfortunately. So any questions on that? Is that useful to kind of see into TestGrid and kind of walk through a couple things there? Saw a couple heads nodding. Okay. And the other thing, we'll put this recording up on the web, and hopefully this is informative to other people as well. Yesterday there was talk about maybe making a little bit more formal video, going through a few concrete workflows and having some documentation on the side of those as well. So just to give the broader community a little more persistent information and some examples. Stop screen share, and I think that was basically the same set of stuff that we went over yesterday. A little more information today on features. Any questions from the group?
Double mute. Documentation wise, for the test grid stuff, if somebody can kind of just put the instructions together, I'm more than happy to like go through and grab the screenshots. And since I'm like fresh eyes on it, I'll be able to be like, this makes no sense.
Okay. Yeah, Aaron said that he was going to talk to somebody that he works with yesterday with respect to some of that. So I'll circle back with him and see. And it initially, I was just sort of thinking throw something simple in the developer guide, but this would make sense to have on the formal web, especially once you get in, like having screenshots would make it much more navigatable. Just plain words, like what I was doing there with the mouse and visually, it was very much a visual process, and just doing that in words without screenshots, yeah, that wouldn't work so well.
Yeah, it's a lot of plain text inside the interface, so screenshots kind of help make that coherent.
Makes sense. I may actually open up I might just make a docs issue as a reminder and point Aaron at that and see if his person wants to do it.
Cool.
Awesome. Anything else today? All right, well, later today, we will be going through the process of attempting to cut a first alpha release. We will see how it goes. I expect a whole bunch of documentation updates because right now we have a very loose Google Doc procedure, and over the next, probably this release and the next one, I'm hoping that we refine that and actually get it out onto GitHub out of the Google Doc, and all of the older references to the prior tool are replaced by the new tool, and we've exercised the documented process and have confidence that it's up to date and right. So today should be an interesting day for that. All right. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on Slack and in a week in the Zoom meeting. Have a great day.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Tim.